On this episode of Tiny Research Wins.
I was sitting on an opportunity to make our research team truly indispensable. And it was built through the relationship nobody really told me to make. And it was done with a preparation method nobody really told me to develop. I feel like the research that changes things is almost never the research that was formally requested. It's the research already shaped around the real question before anybody knew to even ask for it.
This is Tiny Research Wins. Each episode unpacks one powerful way to increase research impact from experts who have helped build great products. I'm your host, Leo Hoare, founder of the UXR Institute. I invited today's guest because she told me this tip about visualizing your data at the beginning of a project, and it blew my mind. The specific way she explained it, I just thought it was the smartest thing in the world, so I figured she'd have a lot more great stuff where that came from. Our guest today has been doing UX research for over 8 years now, with a lot of it in the gaming industry, which is just fascinating to me. She's served as a manager of a UX research team, and she teaches a games user research course at Northern Arizona University. She holds a PhD in anthropology and is currently serving as a peer reviewer for the UXPA International Conference. Most recently, she's working at Vibe Insights Lab as a research consultant. Friends, meet Mariya Vizireanu.
Hi, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm excited to chat with you and nerd out.
Let's do it. Remind me where in the world you are located.
I'm in Flagstaff, Arizona, which is not like a desert at all. It's at 7,000 feet above sea level. So you have to be really good to live here, and breathe like a human being. I'm still getting used to it.
Does this mean when you go back to sea level, you feel like you have superpowers, like you've developed?
Probably win a marathon. Unfortunately, yes. I should get competitive anytime I visit Los Angeles, where I just moved from, actually.
Yes, you can go back and say, look at my marathon times, people.
That is the plan. That was the plan all along.
Nice. Amazing. Well, to get down to it, you've worn some very interesting UX research hats over the years. Tell us about them.
Yeah. Well, like you mentioned, I am an ex-anthropologist now in industry research. And yeah, I've spent about 5 years as an embedded researcher in the video game industry. That was definitely by design. I tried really hard to get into video games once I realized there's real jobs there. So I worked on a variety of products, from mobile games to entire platforms where players generate their own content, which is really cool. They create their own games and experiences. And I feel like games are one of the hardest research environments, in my opinion, because the product is constantly changing and decisions move so fast, especially in startups. So I feel like that's where I learned that the most important researcher skill isn't a method. It's treating your stakeholders like users of your own work.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And the kind of dynamically changing environment, that's become even more so, right, with the advent of AI in gaming?
Yes, definitely speeding things up even more and making things more complicated.
Nice. Well, it's awesome to be able to claim that you work in one of the hardest spaces.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, it gives you
I
some
agree.
cred. Yeah. So you've got a really valuable and specific tip for our listeners related to stakeholders. So we're not going to let the cat out of the bag yet, but set us up. Tell us your struggle story or the situation that inspired what you're going to share.
Yeah. Okay. So in one of my roles, so there was a designer I liked, and we started having casual catch-ups, nothing really formal. And other researchers do this too. They did it on the teams as well. That chat, talk about how they could help. They stay connected. So that part wasn't really unusual. But what was different is what I started doing before those meetings and how I would prepare and how I'd plan what I wanted that catch-up time to really be and shape it. Meanwhile, there was a major AI-powered set of features that was getting prioritized across the org. It was complex, it was risky, there was lots of player concern about it, and multiple teams had a stake in it. So then I realized that I already understood the design vision and some of the key tensions and assumptions in a way that I never would have gotten from a formal request, which Normally, you have a formal process for being asked for a study. And so by the time the study kicked off and everyone was kind of scrambling to understand all this context, I'd been asking those questions for weeks, maybe even months. And, most researchers were just starting that work at exactly the moment they were also supposed to be planning a concrete study, which is understandable. We're all busy, we have multiple projects going on, but I was sitting on an opportunity to make our research team like truly indispensable. And it was built through the relationship nobody really told me to make, and it was done with a preparation method nobody really told me to develop. So that was kind of where I was.
So I think we can move to the big reveal. And our setup here that we're going to use is you basically have to complete the sentence. One thing a researcher can start doing tomorrow to increase their impact is, and then I put it over to you.
Yeah, it's might sound simple, okay, but I'll go into more detail. That is scheduling a recurrent catch up with a key stakeholder, and before you walk in, preparing one thing you don't understand about their world, as well as something useful to give in return.
Wow. That involves, I can say right off the top of my head, a certain amount of vulnerability. You're showing up and you're saying, I don't know this thing. Whereas a lot of researchers, I think myself included, we want to be the people who know stuff.
And I became more and more okay with that the more senior I got. I feel like it was definitely harder early on when you are trying to hide the fact that you're not understanding everything. But no, that's the wrong way to go about it from my experience.
So walk us through in some detail. How does a person go about actually doing this? Because I think it sounds simple enough, but I think it would be helpful to hear your tips on how to actually do it.
Yes, and I kind of feel like there are several aspects to make this truly successful because it sounds so easy on the surface. But this is kind of the way I approached it. So first, you pick one stakeholder, you start there, whose work ideally touches multiple teams. Start with somebody you already have rapport with, you feel comfortable with on some level. And I would say keep the first part human. You want to talk about their week, their work. It should not feel like an intake form. The relationship has to be real. So that's important. Another key thing, you got to do your homework first. And this is what I feel like most researchers may skip. Again, we're all very busy. But before the meeting, you write down at least one thing from like Slack or a recent doc you don't fully understand. That's your question for the meeting. So by the time a formal study kicks off, you already have the context everyone else is like scrambling to catch up on, especially when the feature is very complex. And you ask about that thing you don't understand directly. Hey, I saw this come up like a couple of weeks ago. I still don't get it. Can you help me? Maybe you tell them how you view it and see if that's correct or not. It feels uncomfortable and you do it anyway. Because at the end of the day, you're the person on the team whose job requires you understand everything, the user and the product vision. So that's okay that you're asking questions. You could also, other than that, I like to end with a couple of other questions. You might do this the same way. Like, what's the biggest decision you're facing soon? Like, what assumptions in your work scare you? What keeps you up at night? That kind of stuff to really understand their space. And I like to take notes after, not during. Again, I don't want it to feel like an intake form. Finally, bring something to give. So that might take a little bit of preparation. So like a relevant older study or a published finding that you shared recently and they might have missed, maybe an opportunity to ask a question on a survey I'm about to field anyway, or a set of interviews that I'm doing. So like, is there any way I could be helpful? And that turns the meeting into less of an interview and more into a partnership, which it should be. And afterwards, you kind of think of what you heard, you map it to your research roadmap, and you'll see opportunities before anyone files a formal request. So also when you pitch your research, you can anchor it to the decision that they already told you was coming. So that's helpful too.
I love both of those steps, the asking the question and the choosing of the thing to bring in advance, especially because
Yeah.
it's so thoughtful and considerate of the stakeholder. And I can remember myself in a past life scrambling to pull stuff up as I'm talking to somebody like, oh, this might be relevant. And to actually show up and show that you've done your homework just sounds so powerful. And I wanted to add, it sounds like maybe something from my own past that would be helpful. Um, I used to like to creep on meetings and sort of attend stuff, that maybe I wasn't necessarily invited to. And there was always a ton of stuff that would come up, especially if it was sales or a hardcore kind of finance thing that I didn't understand. And so that could be great fodder too for bringing, something to one of those stakeholders. Like, hey, I heard you mention this concept. I have no idea what that is. Can you explain it
Yeah.
to me?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Being a fly on the wall is a huge deal. I used to be in situations where that wasn't always possible. Some meetings like to stay small and only with relevant stakeholders. So in that case, you kind of have to sell your importance and the fact that you are the person who connects them to the user. So it's helpful for you to understand broader context. So yeah, that could take work too to deserve to be a fly on the wall, but it's very useful.
Totally. So let's break things down even more. And can you give us a concrete example of when you've done this? And of course, scrubbed all top secret confidential info.
That is the key. Yeah, yeah. I thought of this sort of as one of the key things I developed in my time with the video games because of a specific example. So I was working at one of the video game startups, and those kinds of catch-ups I just described, it made it possible to lead a very strong mixed method research program on a few major AI-powered experiences right as they were being prioritized. So I came into the formal kickoff that later happened already understanding kind of the design vision, the key risks, your assumptions that were untested. And that really helped shape research that was anchored to real decisions, not just interesting questions. And it really surfaced findings that were applicable across multiple teams because of that one stakeholder who was able to do some back and forth with me and like really, expand my mental map of what was going on. Most importantly, those kinds of catch-ups and understanding the space and seeing why things are changing. Oh, that decision that got scrapped and that team's now working on something else. Why? I couldn't always get it even in the meetings I attended. So it helped because the immediate milestones were changing so fast in this space that having a strong prior understanding like really helped make sure that insights were relevant, even if teams started to shift specific priorities and decisions during research, which of course totally happened. So half of the things I felt like I started with were like not applicable anymore, but because I had those catch-ups, I had the wider context, I'm building other questions that would be relevant no matter what we did with the product. And
Yeah.
at the end of the day, the great thing was it actually resulted in measurable lifts in like daily active users and things like that. And I feel like none of it would have happened if I started to understand that complex product at the same moment that I was supposed to plan the study. So the catch-ups were everything. Yeah, they made me be weeks in advance and kind of have longer vision in mind.
What's the most common way this kind of thing goes wrong? What pushback might a researcher face from stakeholders or from their own habits potentially? What should someone watch out for? That kind of thing.
Yeah, I think what's top of mind, well, first of all, the preparation I mentioned is something most people might skip and think like, oh, I'll have something in mind to ask. And lots of researchers have informal catch-ups all the time. It's the difference is showing up with something specific to learn, so you do have to put a little bit of time beforehand. So if you leave without understanding something new about the product, it was a relationship check-in, not a practice, and I'm talking about more of a practice here. The vulnerability can be very hard. Admitting you didn't follow a slide conversation, it might feel like a credibility risk, which I know I felt that at the beginning big time, but it isn't. At the same time, you might want to start with somebody you trust as a stakeholder anyway, not somebody brand new who doesn't know you too well. And watch out for drift. If the stakeholder starts using the time to kind of brief you on updates and that's where you're going at that point, rather than sharing something that's uncertain, you've kind of lost the signal. So you do need to protect some question asking time. And I already said this, but it's very important to keep it reciprocal. I hope that's how you pronounce that word. If it starts feeling like one-sided, the relationship will wear thin. So you always bring something. And that takes preparation too, right? Because you might not be thinking just the research you personally done. You're thinking everything the team has done. So you need to catch up on that and see what's relevant to your buddy there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a really great point because sometimes when people see a meeting on their calendar with researcher person, they just assume that, okay, this is like for me to just hand them a bunch of projects. And so it's really on the researcher to frame and direct and be proactive and say, this is what I want to use this time for. This isn't an intake meeting where we're getting new projects.
Yeah, and I really in my head I would only leave the last 10 minutes. It was usually half-hour catch-ups. It was only the last 10 minutes where I was thinking like, all right, I actually came with something in mind and I was hoping you could help me understand something. The first 20 were all over the place. They were just kind of building a relationship and a friendship and whatnot. So it doesn't even have to be the whole 30 minutes where you're like, all right, I have goals for this meeting. It's more like just part of it that you don't want to lose.
You mentioned the word friendship. That's interesting to me.
Yeah, and one of the places I worked for, one of their mottos was "It's a small world," and it really, really is. It's funny, you run into people, you feel like, "Oh my God, what are you even doing here?" I haven't seen you in years. It is a small world. You are making friends. You might work again in a totally different setting. So yeah, I really mean it. And luckily, I've had a lot of great people I worked with that I can call friends, even the ones I haven't met in person yet, which is crazy.
That is the wild part. Yeah.
Yeah.
But, I like the way you put it. Like, a lot of what you're doing is relationship building. It's not
Yeah.
purely transactional. It's actually building a relationship.
It is
Yeah.
key. It really is key. It's a small world.
Amazing. Well, to bring things toward a conclusion, what's one thing you want our audience to hold on to when they try this out?
Yeah, okay. Well, to be inspirational, I feel like the research that changes things is almost never the research that was formally requested. It's the research already shaped around the real question before anybody knew to even ask for it. And you build that by staying close to decision makers, stakeholders. I'm sure everyone's heard it. Be curious, be useful, be honest about what you don't know. That's, I guess, my big thing I want to emphasize. And someone awesome I worked with in gaming once reminded me of this famous quote, like if you ask a question, you might be fooled for like 5 minutes. But if you never ask, you remain a fool forever. So the researchers with the most impact, I feel like, aren't the ones who always know the answers. They're the ones who keep asking, right? And even when it's uncomfortable. And you already know how to ask good questions, guys. So start asking them in both directions. That's my send off.
I absolutely love that. That is something I will hold with me because, again, researchers, no matter where you're coming from, if it's UX world, in academia, it's even can be even worse. You're trained to be kind of the expert, and so to
Yeah.
keep in mind, like, it is okay to be humble. It's okay to be in the position of being a learner, not just the expert. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And you got to be comfortable with it and know that that's exactly your role to absorb information, not just look for answers.
I love it.
Oh.
Thank you so, so much for sharing this with us today. My final question, if anyone in the audience wants to hear more about you or your work, where on earth can they find you?
I feel like I'm all over the place, but honestly, the easiest way is to connect with me on LinkedIn. Just Mariya Vizireanu, not that many of us, hopefully, with that spelling. LinkedIn, I try to post, the class I teach, any kind of tips and tricks about research, any kind of resources about how to get into, industry from academia or how to get into gaming. And also, if you happen to be, yeah, in Las Vegas in June, I am at UXPA, so it would be awesome to say hi in person, not just remotely.
That's awesome. Thank
Yeah.
you again so, so much for joining us. And thanks everyone for listening. To learn more about the UXR Institute, check us out at uxrinstitute.com. And if you liked what you heard today, you know what to do. Hit that subscribe button. See you all next time.